Hello everyone. If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
The walk that changed everything. I thought I was simply going for a walk, but that evening, one ordinary street in my American neighborhood showed me something I had been trying very hard not to see. My marriage felt distant. My children were asking questions I did not know how to answer, and even simple English conversations made me tired. I almost turned around before reaching the corner. Then a stranger smiled at me and said 6 words that completely changed my night. I still remember them. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon in the United States. The kind of day when the sidewalks looked almost too peaceful to match what was happening inside my head. I had spent most of the morning worrying about my family, replaying a difficult conversation with my husband, and wondering why I suddenly felt so exhausted by things that used to feel normal. My English was not the biggest problem, but when I was stressed, even simple sentences sometimes disappeared from my mind. I could understand people, but speaking felt like carrying a heavy grocery bag with one hand. So I put on my walking shoes and stepped outside. My neighborhood was calm. I passed small American houses, parked cars, green lawns, mailboxes, and a woman watering flowers near her driveway. A dog barked at me as if I owed him money. I laughed for the first time that day. Then I noticed something interesting. Every few steps, I saw a tiny English lesson without opening a textbook. A sign said, "Slow down." Another said, "Children at play." I quietly repeated the words. Slow down. Children at play. Simple English. Real life. No grammar book. No test. No pressure. Just me walking and speaking softly to myself. Scientists often connect gentle physical activity with better mood and lower stress, and I could feel why. My thoughts were still there, but they were no longer shouting. They were walking beside me. Then, near the corner, an elderly man sitting on his porch looked at me and smiled. I smiled back, expecting nothing. Instead, he raised his hand and said, "You look like you needed this walk." I stopped. For a second, I could not answer. How could he know? I had never met him before. And then he pointed toward the next street and said something that made my heart suddenly beat faster. Because what he told me next was not really about walking at all. It was about my marriage. When home felt heavy. The strangest part was that my husband had not said anything cruel that day. He had not slammed a door or walked away. He had simply looked at me during dinner and asked, "Are you happy?" That question followed me through the whole house like a shadow. I wanted to say yes. I had a family, children, a home, and a quiet life in the United States. But the honest answer was much harder. I was tired. Not just physically tired, but tired in the way that makes even a normal Tuesday feel like a mountain. After my walk, I came home and found my husband in the kitchen. He was washing dishes while our children were arguing about who had taken the last cookie. It was completely ordinary, almost funny. I stood there watching them and suddenly realized something painful. I loved my family deeply, but I had stopped enjoying my life. That frightened me more than any argument. I went upstairs, changed my clothes, and looked at myself in the mirror. "What is wrong with me?" I whispered. Then I laughed because my reflection looked just as confused as I felt. That night, I opened my phone and searched for simple English listening practice. I did not want a difficult lesson. I did not want advanced vocabulary. I wanted English that sounded like real life. So I practiced one sentence: "I need a little time to think." I repeated it slowly. I listened. I spoke. I repeated it again. It sounded simple, but suddenly the sentence felt useful beyond English. I realized I needed that sentence in my marriage, too. Sometimes when emotions become too loud, the smartest thing is not to win an argument. It is to pause. Psychologists often describe this kind of pause as creating space between emotion and reaction. In simple words, you give your brain a few seconds before letting your feelings drive the car. My brain had been driving for weeks, and honestly, it was a terrible driver. The next morning, I went for another walk. This time, my husband came with me. We walked side by side without saying much. Then he stopped near a mailbox and asked, "Did that man on the porch say something to you yesterday?" I looked at him, surprised. "Why do you ask?" He hesitated. Then he told me something I had never expected. He had seen that man before. And apparently, the old neighbor knew something about our family that I did not know. My quiet American neighborhood. I thought I knew my neighborhood, but that morning I discovered that a quiet American street can hide more stories than a crowded city. My husband and I were walking slowly when he finally told me, "That man helped me once." I stopped immediately. "Helped you with what?" He looked uncomfortable, and for the first time in weeks, I saw fear in his eyes. Before he could answer, a school bus passed us, a little boy waved from the window, and my husband simply said, "I'll tell you when we get home." Of course, that made me want to know even more. We kept walking, but my mind was running faster than my feet. Our neighborhood looked peaceful as always. American flags moved gently in the morning wind. Sprinklers clicked across green lawns. A delivery driver left a package on a porch. Someone was already walking a golden retriever that seemed more confident than every human on the street. I smiled, but inside, I was thinking about my husband's strange answer. This was one reason I had started walking every day. When life becomes complicated, walking gives your thoughts somewhere to go. I began noticing details I had ignored before. I learned the names of streets. I read small signs. I listened to people saying simple phrases like, "Good morning, take care, and see you around." These were tiny pieces of real American English, and I started repeating them quietly. Take care. 2 simple words, but they sounded warm. I also noticed how different people used their neighborhood spaces. Some sat outside with coffee. Some exercised before work. Parents rushed children toward school. Older neighbors watched everything from their porches like unofficial security cameras. It made me laugh. One afternoon, I walked alone and saw the same elderly neighbor sitting outside. He waved me over. "You're walking again," he said. "Yes," I answered. It helps me think. He nodded slowly. Then he asked, "Are you thinking about leaving?" My heart dropped. "Leaving where?" I asked. He looked toward my house and said, "Your marriage." I stood completely still. I had never told him about our problems. Not one word. He lowered his voice and added, "Your husband thinks you don't know something." Suddenly, the peaceful street felt completely different. The birds were still singing. Cars were still passing. The sprinklers were still clicking. But I was no longer listening to the neighborhood. I was listening to one question screaming inside my head. What was my husband hiding from me? The neighbor who knew too much. I went home that afternoon with one sentence stuck in my head. Your husband thinks you don't know something. I wanted to laugh it off, but I could not. What could my husband possibly be hiding? Another woman? Money? A serious family problem? My imagination created 10 terrible answers before I even reached my front door. Then I remembered something important. Fear is very good at writing stories that may not be true. So I took a breath and decided not to accuse anyone. I would simply ask. When I walked into the kitchen, my husband was making coffee. He looked at me and smiled. "Long walk?" he asked. "Very long," I replied. He laughed, but I noticed his hands were shaking slightly. That tiny detail made my heart beat faster. I sat at the table and said, "Can we talk?" He turned off the coffee machine. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I asked, "Do you know the man who lives near the corner?" His face changed immediately. He sat down. "Yes," he said. "His name is Robert." I waited. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. My husband looked at the floor and finally explained that Robert had helped him several months earlier when he was struggling with something at work. It was not an affair. It was not another family. But there was more. My husband had been keeping a secret because he was afraid I would misunderstand it. He had been quietly taking extra hours and saving money for something important. I stared at him. For what? He reached into a kitchen drawer and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. I read it slowly. The English was simple, but my hands were trembling so much that I had to read the sentence twice. For the woman who never gives up. I looked at my husband. "What is this?" He smiled sadly. "It is for you." Suddenly, all the anger I had carried for weeks became something softer. He told me he had noticed how discouraged I had become. Especially when I struggled to speak English or felt that everyone else was moving forward while I was standing still. He wanted to surprise me with something that would give me confidence again. Robert had helped him plan it. I almost cried. Then my husband said, "But there is one problem." I looked at him. He pointed toward the window. Robert was standing outside, holding a large cardboard box. And whatever was inside that box was about to change our family's life. The box that saved our marriage. The box looked ordinary, but when Robert placed it on our kitchen table, my husband suddenly looked more nervous than I had ever seen him. Before you open it, he said, promise me you won't laugh. I smiled. Now I definitely want to laugh. He shook his head, and for a moment, the tension disappeared. I opened the box slowly. Inside were walking shoes, a small notebook, a pair of headphones, and dozens of handwritten cards. I picked up the first card. It said, 1 walk. 1 English sentence. 1 good thought. I looked at my husband in disbelief. You made all this for me? He nodded. Robert smiled from the doorway. He explained that my husband had told him how discouraged I had become, so they created a simple challenge every day. I would walk through our neighborhood, listen to simple English, speak 1 sentence aloud, and write down 1 thing I was grateful for. It sounded almost too simple. But that was exactly why I loved it. I had spent so much time believing that improving my English required long study sessions, perfect grammar, and endless vocabulary lists. Yet here was my husband reminding me that real English lives in ordinary moments. I put on the new shoes that evening. Where are we going? I asked. He smiled. Nowhere special. We walked past the same houses, the same mailboxes, the same trees. And the same stubborn dog that barked at me like I had personally offended his ancestors. I opened my notebook and wrote my first sentence, today, I feel hopeful. Then I said it aloud. Today, I feel hopeful. My husband repeated it. Today, I feel hopeful. We both laughed. It was such a small moment, but something inside me shifted. Walking beside him, I realized our marriage had not been broken because we disagreed. We had become tired, distracted, and afraid to say what we really needed. The walks gave us a place where nobody had to win. We simply moved forward together. Research on walking and emotional well-being often points to benefits from regular physical activity. And I could understand the idea in a very personal way. My body was moving, my mind was calming down, and my English was becoming part of my real life instead of a school subject. But the biggest surprise was waiting at home. When we returned, my daughter ran toward me and grabbed the notebook. Mom, she said, I want to do this too. I smiled. Then she turned to my husband and asked 1 question that made both of us completely silent. Why did you need Robert to help you if this was really for Mom? My daughter saw what I missed. My daughter's question froze the kitchen. Why did you need Robert to help you if this was really for Mom? I looked at my husband, and suddenly the little notebook in my hand felt much heavier. My husband took a slow breath. Because, he said, I was scared I was losing your mom. I did not expect those words. Not from him. Not that night. I sat down, and my daughter quietly sat beside me. My husband explained that he had noticed something I had tried to hide. I was smiling less. I was speaking less. I was avoiding conversations because I was afraid of making English mistakes. Even with my own family, I sometimes kept quiet when I had something to say. He thought the walks might help me find my voice again. My daughter looked at me and said, Mom, you don't have to speak perfect English. Then she laughed. I make mistakes every day, and nobody fires me. I laughed so hard that I nearly cried. Children have a wonderful way of turning a serious problem into one sentence. That night, she asked me to teach her one English sentence from my notebook. I chose, "I am getting better every day." She repeated it. Then I repeated it. Soon, all three of us were saying it together in the kitchen. It sounded almost silly, but I felt something changing. English was no longer a test I had to pass. It became something we could share as a family. The next afternoon, my daughter joined me for our neighborhood walk. She pointed at street signs and asked what everything meant. "What does no parking mean?" she asked. "It means you cannot leave your car there," I said. She nodded seriously. "So basically, the sign is telling your car to go away." I laughed. She was learning English without realizing she was learning. And maybe I was doing the same thing. We walked past houses, playgrounds, and a small community garden. The weather was cool, and the neighborhood felt peaceful. I noticed how different the seasons could affect our mood and routines. Some days invited long walks, others made everyone rush indoors. But my daughter kept talking. She told me about school, friends, and a boy who apparently had the worst haircut in America. I listened. Really listened. For the first time in months, I was not thinking about my problems while someone was talking to me. I was simply there. Then, near the end of our walk, my daughter suddenly stopped and pointed toward Robert's house. "Mom," she whispered, "why is Dad going inside that house?" The secret inside Robert's house. I watched my husband disappear through Robert's front door, and suddenly our peaceful neighborhood walk felt like the beginning of a mystery. My daughter squeezed my hand and whispered, "Mom, should we follow him?" I almost laughed. "Absolutely not." Then she looked at me and said, "You looked curious." Children are dangerous when they are right. I wanted to know what my husband was doing inside that house, but I also remembered what our walks had taught me: slow down before reacting. So we sat on a bench across the street. I took out my little notebook and wrote, "Wait before you worry." It became my English sentence for the day. My daughter read it aloud and smiled. "That sounds like something Grandma would say." We waited for almost 20 minutes. Then Robert opened the door and called my name. "Come in," he said. I looked at my daughter, took a deep breath, and walked across the street. Inside, I discovered something I never expected. Robert's living room had been turned into a tiny practice space. There were books, headphones, a small speaker, maps of the United States, and photographs of different American neighborhoods. My husband stood beside a table covered with notes. I stared at him. "What is all this?" He smiled nervously. "Your new walking project." I thought he was joking. He explained that Robert had spent years helping people in the community practice English through everyday conversations. His idea was simple. Instead of studying English only at a desk, I could use my neighborhood as my classroom. A grocery store sign could teach vocabulary. A conversation with a neighbor could teach listening. A walk could become speaking practice. Even the weather could create a sentence. It's chilly today. The sidewalk is wet. The sun feels warm. Simple sentences, real situations, real American English. I suddenly understood why my husband had been so secretive. He was not hiding another life from me. He was trying to help me rebuild mine. But then Robert opened a folder and handed me a photograph. It showed my husband standing outside a community center with several families. He started this because of you, Robert said. I looked at my husband. Because of me? He nodded. He admitted that he had watched me slowly lose confidence and felt helpless. He wanted me to have something that belonged to me, something beyond being a wife and a mother. I felt tears coming. Then Robert pointed to the last page in the folder. It contained a list of names, dates, and addresses. At the bottom was my husband's name. Next to it were 3 words that made my stomach tighten: she doesn't know. I looked at him, confused. What don't I know? He became silent. Robert closed the door behind us and said, there is one more thing your husband never told you. The day I almost quit. I had spent weeks believing my husband was hiding something terrible. And now I was standing inside Robert's house with a folder that seemed to prove it. My hands were cold. My daughter was waiting outside. Robert looked at my husband and said, tell her. My husband finally looked at me and whispered, I wanted to help you, but I made one mistake. My heart dropped. What mistake? I asked. He looked down. I thought I could fix everything for you. I almost laughed because that sentence hurt more than an angry argument. I did not need fixing. I needed to feel heard. I told him exactly that. For the first time in months, I stopped choosing my words carefully. I spoke slowly, but I spoke honestly. I am tired of pretending I am okay. I am tired of being afraid of making English mistakes. And I am tired of feeling like everyone around me is moving while I am standing still. My husband did not interrupt. He simply listened. Robert quietly left the room. Outside, I could hear my daughter talking to the neighbor's dog as if they had been friends for years. Somehow, that ridiculous little sound made me smile. I realized I had been waiting for a dramatic solution when what I really needed was a simple conversation. We decided to walk home together. The sky was turning orange, and the air had become cooler. I noticed how much easier it was to breathe when I was not carrying a secret. On the sidewalk, my husband said, I am sorry. I answered, I am sorry too. Then he asked, do you still want to keep walking? I smiled. Yes. But this time, I choose the route. That sentence became more important than he realized. We walked past the playground, the small community garden, and the corner where I had first met Robert. Along the way, I practiced simple English sentences aloud. I need time. I can speak. I can make mistakes. I can try again. They were not impressive sentences, but they felt powerful because they were true. There is something about repeating a simple sentence while your feet keep moving that makes it feel believable. My daughter ran ahead and shouted, Mom, hurry up. I laughed and called back, I'm coming. For the first time, I was not running away from my life. I was walking toward it. But when we reached our house, I noticed an unfamiliar car parked across the street. A woman stepped out, looked directly at my husband, and then looked at me. My husband suddenly stopped walking. He whispered, "Oh no." The woman walked toward us holding an envelope. "Are you her?" she asked. I nodded. She handed me the envelope and said, "You need to read this before you make your next decision." I opened it. The first line made my heart stop. Love found a new rhythm. The first line of the letter said, "Your husband asked us to help you remember who you are." I read it twice because my brain suddenly forgot every English word I knew. I looked at my husband. He looked terrified. "Who are they?" I asked. The woman introduced herself as Sarah, a volunteer from the local community center. She explained that my husband had contacted her months earlier because he had noticed how much I had changed. He did not want to control my life. He wanted me to reconnect with people, build confidence, and have something that belonged to me. The envelope contained an invitation to a small neighborhood English conversation group. I stared at the paper, then started laughing. After all the mystery, all the worrying, all the dramatic thoughts in my head, the secret was an English conversation group. My husband looked at me and said, "I know it sounds ridiculous now." I shook my head. "It sounds very you." We both laughed. That laugh mattered. It was the first real laugh we had shared in a long time. The next Saturday, I went to the community center. I was nervous. My English was not perfect, and I was afraid people would notice every mistake. Then Sarah smiled and said, "Nobody here speaks perfect English." I thought, what a beautiful sentence. We sat in a circle and talked about ordinary things, weather, food, family, weekend plans, and our neighborhoods. Someone said, "The weather changes so quickly here." I answered, "Yes, sometimes I need a jacket in the morning and sunglasses in the afternoon." Everyone laughed. I had made a small joke in English, and nobody corrected me. They simply understood me. That was the moment I finally understood something important. Communication is not a performance. It is connection. Later that afternoon, my husband and I took another walk. We talked honestly about our marriage. We admitted that we had both been trying to protect each other in ways that sometimes created distance. He wanted to solve my problems. I wanted him to simply listen. We agreed to walk together more often, but not because walking could magically fix a marriage. Walking gave us time to talk without staring at a screen, rushing toward dinner, or waiting for the next argument. We started noticing small things again. A sunset. A funny dog. Our children racing down the sidewalk. A neighbor waving from a porch. My life had not become perfect, but it had become lighter. And then, one evening, my daughter found the old notebook and opened the final page. She read my sentence aloud. I thought I was walking to heal myself, but I was actually walking back to my family. She looked at me and asked, "Mom, is that the end?" I smiled. Almost. Because the next morning, I received a message from Sarah that contained one unexpected invitation, and this time, it had nothing to do with English. One walk, a different life. The invitation said, "Would you like to lead our Saturday neighborhood walk?" I stared at the message for almost a minute. Me? Lead a walk? In English? A few months earlier, I would have found 10 reasons to say no. I was afraid of making mistakes. I was afraid people would judge me. I was afraid I was not good enough. But that morning, I looked at my walking shoes by the door and smiled. I typed one simple answer, "Yes, I would love to." That tiny sentence felt bigger than any speech I had ever given. On Saturday morning, I arrived at the community center and saw a small group waiting outside. My husband and children came too. Robert stood near the sidewalk, holding his coffee and wearing the biggest smile. I started the walk with one simple sentence, "Let's take our time and enjoy the neighborhood." We walked through familiar American streets, past houses, lawns, trees, mailboxes, playgrounds, and the little community garden I had once ignored. I talked about the weather, local life, family routines, and simple English expressions we could use every day. It's a beautiful morning. The sidewalk is busy today. I'll see you next Saturday. Nobody needed perfect English. Nobody needed complicated vocabulary. We simply talked. At one point, my daughter took my hand and said, "Mom, you look different." I asked, "Different how?" She smiled. Happy. That one word almost broke me. I realized my neighborhood had not changed. The streets were the same. The houses were the same. The weather still changed its mind every 5 minutes. The stubborn dog still barked at innocent pedestrians. What had changed was me. I had learned that a walk cannot solve every problem, but it can create space to face a problem. A conversation cannot repair every marriage, but an honest conversation can open a door. And learning English does not require waiting until you feel confident. Sometimes confidence comes after you speak, not before. My husband and I still have disagreements. Our children still make a mess. Some days I still forget simple English words. Sometimes I walk into a room and completely lose the sentence I was about to say. That is life. But now I laugh instead of hiding. We still take neighborhood walks together. Sometimes we talk about serious things. Sometimes we say nothing. Sometimes we simply watch the sunset. And every time I put on my shoes, I remember the woman who almost turned around at the corner. She thought she was walking because she needed to escape her problems. She did not know she was actually walking toward healing, confidence, love, and her family again. If you are learning English and feeling discouraged today, remember my favorite sentence, I can make mistakes. I can try again. You do not need to become a different person overnight. Take one small step. Say one simple sentence. Listen one more time. Walk one more block. Sometimes a better life does not begin with a giant decision. Sometimes it begins with one quiet step in the right direction. And sometimes, the road that looks ordinary is the road that brings you home.